Welcome to the UWill Discover Sustainable Futures Conference. This is our first session of the week of about 150 sessions. So we're very excited to kick this off. We've been working on it since the last day of last year's UWill Discover Conference. So it's been a year, and this is more of a year-long project. So the conference is kind of probably the busiest time of the project. We have roughly over 200 presenters throughout this week. Our conference is fully hybrid and people are able to present live and online. So I brought the soccer ball up. It's the SDGs of our conference, is our conference theme. And I'm not going to kick it, but we'll consider official as the kickoff. Yeah, there we go. Okay, good. So I acknowledge that the University of Windsor sits on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which includes the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. We respect the long-standing relationship with First Nations people in this place in the 100-mile Windsor-Essex Peninsula and the Straits Les Detroits of Detroit. Today, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Catherine Febria to the UWill Discover Sustainable Futures Conference. She was among one of our first invites on the list. Actually, her work is highly related to a number of the sustainable development goals and her conference theme today. And she's also a celebrated researcher here at the University of Windsor. Dr. Febria has been appointed to a 3-year term on the multidisciplinary expert panel of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. An international body with 139 member governments, the panel produces scientific assessments to support decision-making and works to build capacity to strengthen the science policy interface modeled on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Its panel of experts provides scientific and technical advice and integrates Indigenous and local knowledge systems. As a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Freshwater Restoration Ecology and Assistant Professor in the Department of Integrated Biology and the Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research, Dr. Febria has worked at the United Nations campus in Bonn, Germany, to complete the work. In this exciting presentation, learn about the progress made and opportunities for future engagement in this critical work linked to SDG 14 and life below water. So without further ado, Dr. Catherine Febria.
Thank you, Dr. Burnett. ¿Cómo estás? Good morning, everybody. It's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to be invited to this conference. I really appreciate all of the care that's been put into this effort, not only today, but all year long. I've seen the effort, and I'm really excited to see the student presentations and the collaboration that we see on this case. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I guess I just wanted to situate myself here in YYS, where the river bends. This is a place we also call Windsor. It's been a wonderful home for this research, and I'd love to talk to you about our journey here and thinking about how the work that I do on this SDG of life below water is actually much more than just this one box. I hope we can situate ourselves to understand that, we might find our passion in one of these places, but it's also linked to many other things. So life below water is incredibly important to other functions and things that human beings, animal, plant beings rely on. So clean water and sanitation comes because of the biological communities and processes that happen. But this is also connected to life above land. It's also connected to peace and well-being. It is underpinning all of the good things that make cities sustainable and communities revived, and it's through partnerships that we can really move towards addressing climate action. So I just wanted to check in with you all to express I have a little bit of eco-anxiety today after IPCC's announcement yesterday, sort of this call to global communities that everything needs to happen everywhere all at once. It's really resonant to me. It's a global call that can only happen through individual actions wanting to propel and advocate and implement these changes. So even though I come to you as a person who focuses on freshwater restoration and freshwater ecosystems, I really do see that one thing is connected to all. situate you with the research that happens in our group. I feel like my whole life I've been thinking about how to make this world a better place, whether it be ozone holes in the 80s, thinking about acid rain, and really thinking about how I can use my gifts as a scientist to make things better for next and future generations. It's no coincidence that for decades we as a global community have been trying to focus on conserving and protecting our habitats. And the kind of partnership and success at that has seen some failures and offered lessons learned. It's generated all of this global community to achieve and reach this point of a decade focused on ecosystem restoration. So really calling on local and global actions to come together to curb the loss of land into coastal waterways is the call for the decades, to find local champions all around the world focused on restoring habitats and preventing further habitat degradation. So that's what I think about a lot. Like in this decade, can everything we do work towards this goal? Can everything that we work on in water connect to other SDGs? And a lot of it is really based fundamentally in the science that helps guide this. When we look at the research of where restoration has been most effective at achieving planetary goals and planetary sustainability, I want you to think, is it sort of the examples where we have the best ecological integrity, the best models, and the best science? You can think of these dimensions in this pie chart. And when we look at the research for where the best examples of planetary sustainability are likely to be achieved, it's actually in the realm and in case studies where aspects of human dimensions, human society, local communities have been engaged and maximized at every step of the way. So more than anything, the science is clear that if we want to achieve ecosystem restoration and planetary sustainability, we must incorporate local and indigenous perspectives for impactful science, research, and management. So it's a really big call. I'm going to bring things down to the Great Lakes Basin, to my favorite lake system, to home or the homes. Lakes Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior, and those who work with us, we kind of collectively call ourselves homies. It's a privilege to walk alongside and work with so many different types of science practitioners and community partners to do this work. It really shaped, the values and the vision for the Healthy Headwaters Lab. So it's a privilege to have launched this here at the University of Windsor in 2019. It's intentionally designed to use science to connect land, water, and people for the benefit not of this generation, but future generations. So we are already embedding the science in our value and mission statement. We are certainly values driven because it's the best way that we can anchor our purpose. And we really have conversations and try and put into practice decolonial or anti-colonial methodologies as in the science we pursue. It requires training in interdisciplinary spaces. It must be community centered and responsive. And all of these things, if we do it and really reflect on it and hopefully gather the stories and lessons learned, lead to examples of transformative change that lead to beneficial societal outcomes that all together underpin research excellence. So I hope if you take anything away, the answer when we think about these sustainable development goals at a global scale, the answer continues to be that the solutions are local. If we can continue to make these connections on local scales, they ultimately will become global exemplars. So this is what we're working with locally. I want you to sort of think about your favorite ecosystem and maybe what draws you to sustainability path and the gifts that you've been given. And think about, how would you get your gifts and use your gifts to try and protect this? It's not a charismatic animal. It's not, it's not a panda bear. And I love all of those things, but this is the most common type of freshwater ecosystem in Windsor-Essex County, the roadside drain. Waterways are often buried and bulldozed because of farming or urban intensification. Often waterways, not only in Windsor-Essex, but in urban and human impacted communities around the world have become channelized, bulldozed, they lack legal protections, and have somehow given us permission to build our cities, grow our farms, and build our towns. And so this is where our science is situated. And rather than going to other places, we wanted to really root ourselves in the local ecosystems, really get to know the plant and animal beings in these systems and use our science right here where we're needed. So what does our science include? It includes those tiny invertebrates, benthic invertebrates, the smallest organisms that you can see under a microscope. It includes measuring elements of water quality that are invisible. So the chemistry, the nutrients that really facilitate a lot of biological organisms and ecosystem processes. And we measure these things, we filter these water samples, we look at them on our analyzers here at GLEAR on the campus. We also, instead of trying to find solutions or design experiments in the university, our work is on the land. We've gotten to know a lot of these different local habitats as our experimental system. We work on streams and wetlands to understand biodiversity and ecosystem function relationships. And rather than going to other places, we are engaging this local network of ecosystems as the environmental gradient, agricultural landscapes and urbanized ones, and we knit them together as part of our experiment. So ultimately what this leads to is operationalizing our values. So putting into practice all of these words that we say matter to us as science. And so I hope today to tell you a little bit of our journey. It's only been a few years, to hopefully answer your question of how is this accomplished? How did we do this? And hopefully reiterate that, especially in most science spaces and dominant science spaces, it's about a significance value, a P value, some, important significant outcome. But what I've learned continually over time after doing this for, more than a few decades now is that the learning and the journey, even if it's a failure, are lessons to be learned and shared so that they can't, that we can learn from them in future iterations. I've also learned and recognized that trust-based relationships get us farther than the p-value. So those are the priorities we place. And they ultimately lead to better science questions and approaches and outcomes that are mobilized into policy and practice from the start. So one of the terms that I used in my title was diversity. A synonym for it is pluralism, and that's something we talk about in this paper that I'll talk to you about today. It is in its broadest sense, embracing complexity. It's in line with the other ways of thinking and doing. Architects talk about this and engineers about complexity and systems thinking. Pluralism invites us and directs us to that diversity is a normal aspect of the human and natural environment. And when I use the term pluralism, I'm acknowledging that this is a positive attribute. It's important in the context of dynamic social and ecological systems. So we embedded that actually for the first 18 months when the lab launched here in Windsor, Essex, and the Three Fires territory. We decided that we wanted to embed and implement a process for listening and learning. This is a knowledge co-production process that we have really taken some time and again thought about how could we embed values, relational processes, and that labor as part of the scientific method. And basically it involves a few key things. We first start by recognizing there are different ways of knowing and doing. We wanted to invest in the community relationships and partnerships first by opening ourselves to dialogue, walking farm fields with different farmers, engaging in partnerships with Indigenous community partners. We've developed trust and relationships that allow us to really understand and open ourselves to understanding what are the key research gaps that you're interested in? How can our science skills be of use? What are the barriers or the uncertainties that might limit the application of this science into the field or onto the ground or onto this landscape? And how can we together co-create research approaches and study designs and articulate the outcomes of what we think we can achieve in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years, with the amount we have, with the time we have, with the people and the skills that they have? And how can we be very transparent about this process and embed modes of knowledge mobilization exchange from the beginning and part of the process throughout it all? So a lot of times, just actually having this circle, realizing that this process leads us to different outcomes and not wanting to colonize the outcomes in this whole process has led us to really beautiful outcomes. And I'll just tell you a little bit about what that journey looked like. So we created different roles. Very often a lab will have a lab manager and lab benches. And what was really important, especially on my journey as a science practitioner and a researcher, was that we needed more than just your typical scientist. So we implemented 2 different programs, an Indigenous Knowledge Circle, as well as a farm advisory board, which was supported by a broader farm research network. And these are some of the things that had to happen. We partnered with the Bekejonong Ecokeeper Youth. We hired a retired farmer. We did all of these things, including hiring a lab storyteller, recognizing and honoring the importance of telling our story. So over time, much like everyone else, we got COVID shut out. But I do think that because we had these relationships in place, I landed here in 2019 and COVID started in 2020. We had relationships that were already installed. We had memoranda of understanding with farmers. We had already done some relationship building work that it actually didn't stop everything. We were able to continue on with our first soil carbon project on farm fields. We held an inaugural firm symposium showcasing the work in the community of farmers and farming community members that wanted to engage. We continue to have online and newsletters sent to our community partners at Walpole Island, and we continue to do field work in a great way. And so I'll talk a little bit about how there's some perks to measuring certain things where like social distancing was encouraged. And we published some of our work. So we were able to launch the first traditional ecological knowledge field course and publish on those learnings. And those are the things that continue to be the stories that people ask me about, not the scientific papers, but actually the journey that we've taken as being really informative and helpful to other communities of practice and like-minded sister labs around the world. One thing that I also wanted to make visible was collect data on what it takes to build a science lab that is relational in its outcome, that focuses not just on the papers, but the relationships that emerge if we really engage and authentically put our money where our mouth is. And this is a network map showing if these are the different types of funding sources that a researcher might access. So some of my key sources, like my Canada Research Chair Funds, allowed me to use direct funds towards these different roles. And I applied for a number of different grants, whether they be federal, industry partnerships, a university grant, and even had a seed grant with Ninda Wabjig, our Walpole Island Heritage Center community partner and research partner. All of these, over time, we tracked the ways in which the different grants were connected or supported by a knowledge holder, a facilitator, the farm board, and the IKC, the Indigenous Knowledge Circle, to show just how connected one project was to all of the relational labor that we invested in as a lab. This is a really important figure for PIs and program builders to really understand that if we can embrace complexity, make the connections, then much of our work wasn't just about the grant, but really thinking about how could each project be better served through the relational labor and facilitators and knowledge brokers. So I hope what I will tell you about now is that when we do that and embrace diversity and embrace complexity, outcomes emerge that extend far beyond just the science. So plural, a diversity of outcomes emerge. And that includes not only walking farm fields with different constellations of members in our group, sniffing soil, having a virtual night out where people from around the traditional territory and beyond can join, a plain language newsletter that just explained to farmers how many samples we took, what did we do, what does that analyzer measure and capture, how can we use things like a knitting analogy to really deconstruct and make visible and explain the technology behind some of our fluorometric techniques, and find ways to have conversations about, in a region where conversations are so focused on phosphorus, what is the role of carbon? And really introduce this other nutrient cycle that is really important in the modulation and the release of phosphorus and other nutrients into our Great Lakes basin. What also emerges is that much of the research that we had seen at the time really focused on no-till versus till as an agricultural practice, as if they were binary solutions to farming in the landscape. And in getting to know our farming communities, there is a much broader gradient of ways to achieve conservation. And by doing this, controlling for only one type of soil type, Brookston's clay, which is one of the hardest soils to farm, we were able to identify a number of other conservation measures happening in the region, as well as an agricultural forest that was retired about 75 years ago. And instead of saying, this is the difference between till and no-till, which is actually non-significant, we get a broader insight into the fact that we're starting to see carbon sequestration and changes in organic carbon in our oldest end member, about 50 to 75 years. That gives us a timeline, generational timeline for what we might achieve if we want to pursue restoration in the region. And I'm hoping with that number, we can even think about accelerating that trajectory. So this also then lays out the framework for other students to emerge and layer on their projects across this gradient. I really hope you see Rose's presentation later this week about the first baseline vegetational survey of constructed wetlands in the region that is informing conservation practitioners right here, as well as local farmers. The wetlands might be our best tool and solution, nature-based solution for Windsor-Essex when it comes to climate change, as well as many other students who have gone on to look at different aspects, whether they be water quality, like at Casey, or looking at molecular and microbial components of our agricultural and urban streams, or looking at roadside drains to try and understand if there's a better way to manage them with biodiversity as the key focus. It also means that we can move to the Sydenham River, which is, despite being an agriculturally intensified landscape, is the most biodiverse river for freshwater mussels. It houses species at risk, unionid species at risk, as big as your hand. And through our partnerships, we've been able to get to know and expand our knowledge of the distribution of these species in partnership with St. Clair Conservation Area, Bikejwanong or Walpole Island, Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And I hope you stick around this afternoon for Lauren's presentation, where she shows that we have had a practice in Canada for moving and translocating species at risk. The federal government requires species at risk to move if we need to build a bridge or do a development, but she'll showcase for the first time the data to show that this practice has never actually been revisited in the 15 years of its introduction. And the results that she is, anyway, I won't give it away. Lauren, you can talk about how it's just an incredible study. But more than that, every student here has conducted a really impactful study that will really shape how watersheds might be managed, restored, and how it's really important not to just look at the species at risk, but the community invertebrates that they live together, and that there's a significant complementarity between species at risk and the wider habitat. Moreover, some of the other most exciting things that have emerged through these relationships has been the knowledge circle itself. We have had the privilege of having numerous science practitioners, early career, established from different nations across the traditional territory. Our first example was Mariah, our Indigenous artist in residence. We didn't know, that's not common in science labs. It just made sense for this person and her gifts. And what's emerged is Ojibwe Nature Center. If you go there, there is a coloring book available for free. You can download pages, and they connect you to not only the language of the different plant and animal beings in the Ojibwe Prairie Complex, but also the Anishinaabe names and the invitation for people young and old to color and express creatively your relationship with this place. It's also led to work that has been commissioned by organizations like the International Joint Commission, and we've had opportunities to showcase these stories of how water is life and how our responsibility to care for water is a very feminine, woman-focused gift and responsibility, and as is the importance of sharing those stories. And so I wanted to acknowledge everyone, and especially Kendi Donaldson and Anishinaabe Kwe and scientists here at the University of Windsor, who really has championed and co-directed and fostered this space so elegantly. And I wanted to also acknowledge the traditional ecological knowledge field course, which took place on Walpole Island or Bikejwanong. We were able to publish our findings and our reflections on how to do a land-based course. This is one of the publications that get the most cited or requested, because there is a growing interest in communities to really decenter learning away from campuses and onto the land. And so these are just different but rich examples of how we have been held retreats and workshops where we've invited community partners, where we've been on the land talking about stewardship and restoration with youth, where we have been invited to ceremony, and what was really exciting last year, being invited by the youth to do the first freshwater mussel surveys, not only with our lab, but the constellation of partners that we have really grown with and worked with over the last few years. And so the storytelling piece really does emerge from our Indigenous knowledge circle, longer than when we had, long-term monitoring equipment. Unless you're a core from a lake, stories have been told for millennia about our relationships with humans and land, plant, and water beings. It's from this important value we place on storytelling that our whole social media platform and communication strategy has emerged. And I wanted to acknowledge Shannon Nolan, a PhD student who'll be on Friday's panel to talk about her experience as an alumni on sustainability pathways, as well as Salma, an undergraduate student who is taking our data and quantifying them and making visual to tell you about the power of storytelling when it comes to freshwater ecology. It's really hard, again, if you think about, there's no pandas in these waterways, they're drains. So we really wanted to meet people where they're at in terms of communicating and connecting what we know about the science in the places that we live and the places that we love and places where we work and play. So it's really important, and we invite you to connect with us on our social media platform. We're collecting data, and hopefully you will be able to participate in the story that's still unraveling. So when we do this, there's obviously a lot of challenges and benefits. It takes longer time frames. Scientific grants are not set up to do that. There are very few funding mechanisms, so we've had to be very creative to find ways to continue to invest in our community, and that includes, you know, the UWill Discover community, the Outstanding Scholars community, so many beautiful people around campus that have committed their gifts and really gone on this journey with us, and I'm so grateful. It's really allowed us to, it's actually made us, by being in this public-facing, transparent way, confront with different biases in science. You know, I deal with that every day about, you know, changing perceptions or ideas about what is good science, what does that look like? Especially because hyper-local research, you know, traditionally in the dominant frame would seen as too parochial or not, you know, as impactful as global models and that sort of thing. And there's always inherent power dynamics that we're, you know, having to work with. And if we understand that those things exist and are opening dialogue around how we can navigate them, I'm hoping this will help us achieve and work towards the other benefits that we know. Ultimately, one of the largest challenges, and this is what keeps me at night, is that restoration takes a long time. Mostly we think it fails because we only look at what happens after year one, or we plant the tree and we walk away, or we put the fence up and we walk away. But this is the kind of thing that I think the benefits will help us acknowledge. So those trust-based relationships with people who are stewarding the land, not just for 1 year, but have been doing it for generations. Those are the people we want to invest relationships with, because when the grant runs out, those are the people that are continuing to steward the land and water. True co-development means that, you know, if there is something that is unexpected or doesn't work, we've been on that journey together, so it's not a surprise. You know, we have an internal community peer review that happens before we even, you know, publish it in the public sphere. We can engage by doing this, the funding mechanisms. We have been really privileged to engage with different types of organizations in different places about how we can better support this type of work. And hopefully I can show, and you see different stories of how the process in itself is progress, that we are learning and building capacity and capability as we're doing it. And so it's such a privilege to showcase those voices throughout this conference and beyond. I'm hoping it also validates and legitimizes our local and indigenous knowledge keepers who have known these stories and have known a better way to secure a more sustainable future. And because of that, we are immediately integrating a lot of our knowledge into practice, and it's taking on different spaces and directions that you know, we can't predict. I also wanted to acknowledge that we also are engaging in science and policy. So the ecosystem approach was a conference that took place right here at the university, and we were able to bring together knowledge keepers and experts and scholars and youth and early career researchers to talk about how we can move towards a more holistic science management approach in the Great Lakes. It very much links to, you know, it takes us local to a more regional scale, and ultimately these are the stories that bring me to the global sphere when I enter into UN spaces, talking about the role of biodiversity and ecosystem services and the responsibilities and the knowledge that we have to pass on so that decision makers can mobilize and act on it. So I hope that you can sort of enjoy the local. We have so many new things coming our way and new projects that we're excited to announce in the group and beyond, but ultimately it will be centered on the same purpose. I'm hoping that, you know, people who see this today and, you know, as this conference goes on, really appreciate local and continue to reconnect with nature around you, with the people involved in stewarding nature, and that includes places right here in our backyard, like the Ojibwe Prairie Complex and the beautiful Detroit River. I'm hoping that you can see the ways in which thinking about life about below water is really connected to all of these other things that make a more healthy and vibrant society, not just for us, but for future generations. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak today. I'm happy to talk to people today and throughout the week. And yeah, and I just wanted to acknowledge all of the people who have contributed to this work. So miigwech, thank you so much, and I'm happy to take questions. I was good on time for the first time. That was my goal. Oh, we have someone here. Oh my gosh, we need computer science students. There are, so one of my closest colleagues at Purdue has created has really invested in things like the Internet of Things and tries to find really affordable ways for us to monitor and sensor our waterways. So much of the effort often focuses on things like the Great Lakes, like downstream, but actually much of the changes and much of the biodiversity and ecosystem functioning that we can action are in these small tributaries. But it's impossible because there's hundreds to thousands of small streams and tributaries for every one large river. So I guess find your passion. So that's a computer science thing. I don't know how it works. I just know that someday I'll get these little things that beam into whatever. And there's so much ingenuity that goes on to trying to figure out how to sense create sensors in an affordable way. Communities would want that. Farmers want that. I think also so much information is already there. So I actually work with computer scientists in my European-based work, where we're trying to actually bring together all of the different knowledge bases and to create ways that people can access information more readily, whether they be automating research about restoration ecology. So it's like the High K network. I can send you links on that. We published a paper on it and how we're trying to create ways to bring knowledge together to try and again get to restoration practitioners. Most restoration practitioners on the ground and around the world are not in academic settings. So making available knowledge as soon as possible is one of the goals. It also will obviously help researchers who are doing systematic lit reviews, trying to figure out what restoration project they're working on. What it also does is alleviate a lot of the differences between researchers and practitioners in the global north and the global south. So I think computer science is a vital tool, especially looking to the future and how we can mobilize information, how we can connect communities. And there's, I think there are ways that we can do everything better. So if you think about your skills or maybe a habitat or a community that you're interested in, really building that relationship with them and walking alongside to say, do you need this skill set? What do you need? Is it, do you want, sometimes they just need physical labor. Sometimes they need the brains and the gifts that you bring. But if you're open to the relationship, I know that your computer science gifts, as well as so many other things that you do, will be of use, and the relationships that will emerge, invest in those things, because I'm sure that there's so many ways that computer science can be useful and is essential. Thanks. Sure. Let me just. So, I have been on a journey for a long time. 20 years ago, I did my master's in the Mackenzie Delta, the Decho, in Northwest Territories, and I really, even before then, had a journey. I'm an immigrant settler from the islands now known as the Philippines. It was always really important for me to acknowledge knowledge and my relationship to water, and I think those relationships were really clear to me and have always been really clear. So there's one element of it that's just the way that I understood and connected to the world, with communities and water. And over the last 10 years or so, I really decided to intentionally pivot towards ensuring that science could proceed in an ethical and equitable way. It started to raise questions about whose land, whose water, who do I have obligations to in doing this work? Yes, I knew I was thinking about the next generations, but in this journey, I found really kindred, like-minded spirits and relationships with people who are really thinking about and valuing ecosystems in much the same way as I did. I also, as an ecologist, the more and more I would navigate through understanding the importance of a place or a being or species, there is so much knowledge that would be revealed by understanding indigenous languages about the name. There might be a name that tells us a little bit about the ecosystem, that tells us about the habitat preferences of a bird or a fish. So I think I've just been really open to knowledge in whatever form would be available to me, knowing that we probably needed all of that information. And also, so that was one thing, that's where I began. I also had the privilege of working in Aotearoa, New Zealand for more than 5 years, and was almost given permission and really built the relationships to find a way to integrate and navigate what it's like to be a settler in Indigenous lands and waters, and how to figure out a way for me to feel comfortable and confident as a scientist without I guess just to doing it in an ethical way. So it was really important for me to do things ethically and responsibly, and it really led me down a path of really incredible scientists and relationships that allowed me to really figure out I don't have to choose. We actually need all of those things. So how can I create a structure and a format in a science lab where those values would be front and center? And once I decided to make that path, you know, more interesting science emerged, more interesting people emerged, more interesting stories were told. And so I wanted to make sure that those things that I valued, listening to farmers in an agricultural landscape, listening and being guided by Indigenous communities in the watersheds and the territories where I have obligations to, where I'm situated in, I wanted to make sure those were funded first and that it wasn't something that was done at the end. So to do that, I basically connected with you know, the university and my director and all of the people that I collaborate with to say, this is important to me, I want to fund this. And so I had the privilege of being awarded a Canada Research Chair, and I decided that that was my longest grant. The pluralism paper talks about it. We directed the funds to hiring a farmer, to, you know, becoming and starting a relationship with Candy and Clint. And we decided that, you know, we're a package deal. We're always going to center our work in a good way, prioritizing these relationships first. And it has led us to so many different things. So really, so as the science provider, I collect the receipts and I want to tell people this is how much it costs. Like, this is, you don't do this at the end, you have to do this at the beginning. These are the things that can emerge. This is like, you know, there's not one way to do it, but you need to figure that out, and just almost giving people permission to do that individually and actioning the things that they can with all of the power dynamics that happen as an early career researcher. If you're someone else's lab, there are little things we can all do. And I've done all of those little things. And now when I was given the opportunity to start and launch a new group here, I fronted all of my values first, and like so many amazing things have happened. And it's also like connected me to sister labs. So there are other labs around the world, BioArt labs on campus, Incubator Art Lab, Center for Cities here on campus, you know, the UBC Center for Indigenous Fisheries, there's a nature lab in Detroit, Michigan. There's so many different groups around Turtle Island and my kindness and science community in Aotearoa that really remind me that this is the good work done with good people in a good way. Thanks. You had a question. Okay, thank you again. I do not know how to use this computer. It's gonna walk away, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I don't know about you, but that presentation just prompted so many thoughts and feelings, having grown up in the area, and even just seeing the ditch and having it recognized as an amazing place to be. We just called them ditches, but I grew up in ditches like that in this region, and it was a whole world to us as kids. And now you drive around the region, and just as you say, it's all covered over. And I never really thought of what that meant for the ecology of the system. And I want to thank you. Rarely do I see somebody with such a robust idea of what a knowledge system can be. And I'm just really impressed of how you can go from local to global, from ecological to academia, and bringing in all the knowledge keepers. So I'll be reaching out to you in future about some of the work that I have students do. And I know Kenny probably wants to talk to you too. She's got a project called Flourishing Farm. She's going to talk about where she's helping the unhoused flourish by living on a farm. So anyway, and I recognize a lot of the student names that you talked about, and I do hope that people, as an extension of today's presentation, will go and see the great work that your students are doing. Yeah, so also on Friday, we have a sustainable Kahoot competition. So you would be likely candidates to do well. And if you're a student, you have the opportunity to win $100 if you win the Kahoot. So come one, come all to that. We also have another Kahoot trivia competition happening tomorrow with Caitlin, hosted by Caitlin Ellsworth, and it's about the International Decade for People of African Descent. Another chance to win money, but more importantly, to learn about some of the initiatives and the themes that we have on tap for you this week. And finally, we're going to take a short break. And then if you want to see what the Outstanding Scholars students are like, I see a bunch of them in the room already. They're going to come up and give us a great presentation about the Outstanding Scholars project they did at the beginning of the year about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Just advance warning, I wish that I would have had you come and speak to our OS students based on the presentation I saw today. So that might be a future invitation. So yeah, so thank you very much everyone for coming. We'll take a short break. There's coffee and treats. Well, I think it's more just drinks out front if you want to grab some of those before the next presentation. Thank you once again, Dr. Febria, for coming out. It was a wonderful presentation. I can't describe to you all the things that hit home for me and package that up in a short, succinct way, but I just want to really thank you for taking the time in your busy schedule to come and share all of your work, your knowledge, and the knowledge of all those you work with today. So once again, thank you very much.